Dr. Schuster serves as the president of the Keck Graduate Institute of Applied Life Sciences, a member of the Claremont Colleges in California. KGI remains the only professional graduate school dedicated to education and research in the life sciences and prepares students for leadership roles in the life sciences industry. KGI is focused on translating science into tangible benefits for society, and currently houses the PSM National Office that reviews submissions for new PSM programs. Previously, Dr. Schuster served as Director of Biotechnology Programs and Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the University of Florida. He received his PhD in biochemistry at the University of Arizona. We're pleased Dr. Schuster is able to be with us today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ross. And welcome to all of you, Congressman Hanna, representatives of the Professional Science Masters Association. Especially, I'd like to point out Sheila and Michael for their long-time dedicated and visionary activities to promote what we're here celebrating today. So welcome to the Cortland program, to this great and wonderful concept of professional science master's education. I'd like to say that it's a really fascinating get-together, because I'm hoping that we're celebrating the first and the 300th professional science masters in the country. Now, we have told everybody we were the first PSM in the United States. That may or may not be true, but since there's no one's going to argue today, we'll just claim that, and we'll just move along. The program at IIT sometimes claims they're the first one, and then when we have a contest over that, usually we arm wrestle, and then when I lose, I say, well, okay, how about we're the first one in the life sciences? So we can have those arguments all we want. The key point is that we are all together growing this great area of education, and I'd like to just give you a little bit of perspective from a different view. We've heard about great programs in the large state universities. Ours is a very different program, and it's based in the Claremont Colleges, which is a group of 7 small liberal arts colleges. And the concept of the colleges is really quite different from the large university systems, in that when we see a new need in education, we form an entirely new institution. And that's the reason why Pomona College was formed in 1887 or 8 or whatever. I was pretty young at the time. I don't remember the date. Then they formed a graduate school, and they formed a women's college, Scripps College, and they formed a men's college, which became Claremont McKenna College in World War II, and an engineering school, Harvey Mudd College, in the 50s, a women's college, which became co-ed in the 60s after it formed Pitzer College. And there were 6 institutions in the 90s, and it became, nothing had really been formed as a new institution since the 60s. And in the 90s, my predecessor, Hank Riggs, who was the president of Harvey Mudd at the time, got together with the leaders of the W.M. Keck Foundation, Robert Day specifically, and some leaders in some other visionary areas of education, and they realized that, this biotech thing might not be just a flash in the pan. Maybe there's a real thing going on there. And so they formed the Keck Graduate Institute, and it was devoted to professional science education. And we like to say that, as I say, that we were the first one. It doesn't matter, because I think we've enjoyed it and we've really thrived being part of this great organization. And I think it's been an experience. But what I'd like to do for a few moments is change the discussion to a little bit of pedagogy. And I know that's a favorite word for all of you who are not educators, but I just learned to spell it, and I promised I would use it in a speech, so here I am using it. But what I'd like to do is talk for just a few moments about the professional part of professional education. And the reason I'd like to bring it up is because I would hope that as we grow this strong segment of the graduate education market, that we give some serious thought to how we in fact incorporate that professional part in professional education. So if I could, let me just give you a couple of my thoughts about what professional education really means. We can talk about it. We can talk about hybrids. We can talk about what we think it takes to educate young people to enter the workforce. But that really is a core of what is professional education. If we look back at the studies on other professional education arenas such as medical education, dental education, clergy education, law education. There's some sort of themes that come out of that. And the Carnegie Foundation did a fabulous study, so I borrow heavily from that. But let me just give you my thoughts on what the three cores of professional education are. And I would like to challenge the NPSMA to continue this discussion, if we might, about how to improve on all of those. First off, the overall goal of professional education is to enable graduates to do. They have to go into the workforce. They have to be able to walk into a job, walk into a company, walk into a government organization, and actually do things and perform things. And I think that's not a surprise to those of us who have been involved in medical education. I would hope that most medical graduates would at least, while I don't want to be the first patient from a medical education graduate who has not had other experience, at least they won't walk out being afraid the first time they see a pimple or a little bit of blood. They will have had the experience, and they can actually go in and do, and obviously learn and gain experience. So that's something I think we have to sort of keep in mind as we look for what occurs in the real world. And the real world has limits. It has ways that things have to be done. So in our case, we've looked back at this and we said, okay, that means that what we have to focus on and think about are things like regulatory affairs. One does not get to do what one wants. One is coupled by intellectual property constraints, manufacturing constraints, international regulation kinds of constraints. So those kinds of things have to be involved in sort of a core of thoughtfulness, if you will, about how we focus professional education. The second component of professional education is that education is more often one-on-one, highly engaged, than it is a large classroom arena. And the reason for that is really pretty clear, because when students walk into the environment where they're going to be working, they don't get to hide in the back of a classroom. That's not useful experience. When medical students, just to take that, they actually have to walk around in groups of 3 or 4. And at any time, the professor, the faculty member will point at one of them and say, okay, what's wrong with this patient? What would you do? What are you going to do? You can't hide in a classroom. And that's the kind of education that I think is crucial to consider as we think about professional education. And one of the reasons for that is so crucial that we have to not ever forget it as we design our curricula is that what we want to get, and we all talk about it, is critical thinking. We want our graduates to have habits of mind that will serve them as they go into the workforce. They need to be able to live and work and thrive in an environment where there are no right answers. That is a very different environment from a large classroom where one fills in little circles on an answer sheet with A, B, C, or D. So I would urge us to think about that kind of active learning that's crucial. The third thing is that all professional education programs, at least in the United States, are sort of focused on real-world experiences. Okay, students in medical school don't just get to learn on a model of a human being. They actually have to touch real human beings with real issues and whatever else happens when you touch human beings. And same sort of thing in law schools. It's moving down further and further in the curricula, that students work on particular problems, even in their first year as law students, to work on real problems. So I urge us to focus on having our students interact with real problems. And I emphasize that in our case, the way we've interpreted that sort of mandate as part of professional education, a real problem is not one that someone just gives you as an interesting problem. It's only real if someone pays for it. Okay? Now that's setting an awfully high bar, I have to say. But in fact, every single one of our PSM graduates is required to work on a problem, on a team master's project, that a company pays $57,500 to solve. If it's not a real problem, they won't pay the money. It's real simple. Now, that's setting an awfully high bar, I have to say, and Jim and his staff have to work very hard to work on that. But what it forces are two real things that I think are crucial for PSM discussions. The first thing that it forces is the institution has to have a really deep and solid relationship with companies. Because one is, that's a fair amount of money. That's a real commitment of resource. And in fact, the real commitment is not just that money. It's the fact that we also require the company to put in a liaison. So they're going to put part of a person's time and resources into making sure these projects are successful. So it requires a very deep relationship with companies, and that's partially what we all espouse in these programs. The second thing that it does is it enables students to work in a situation that's real but somewhat protected. As long as companies understand these are students, and sometimes they run off the rails, and sometimes things happen, and whatever goes on in student worlds is okay. But they get to work on real problems and come up with real solutions. So I just want to end by saying it's my hope that as we go forward in perfecting and growing the PSM movement, when we come back here next time to celebrate 600 and 900 programs in this fabulous arena, that we can have a further discussion about how to really make it highly recognized in the United States, highly successful, and I would encourage a discourse so we can all exchange ideas about how best to do professional education. Thank you.